China's economic crisis, the dilemma, the truth, and the path ahead, Part 1. This article took a full year to write. I started back in July of last year. Every time I tried to push deeper, I hit a wall. Not because I couldn't write, because I couldn't face it. Those numbers, every time you engage with them, you have to redigest that weight. Until a few days ago, when I finally got everything I wanted to say down on paper. Whether I'll write something like this again? Who knows? One round of this and you've shed a whole layer of skin. Honestly, writing these words wasn't easy on me either. Why couldn't I finish? Because if you actually engage with those numbers, it's hard to walk away unscathed. I pulled the National Bureau of Statistics database, went through it column by column, and then just sat there in front of my computer for a long while. Not because I was scared, it was a deep exhaustion. You know that feeling? You've been hearing a family member is sick, you're mentally prepared, but until you push open the hospital room door, see that person lying there with tubes everywhere, watch the numbers on the monitor beep, only then does it hit you. This isn't a cold, this is serious. Macroeconomic data is that monitor readout. It doesn't sugarcoat things, doesn't offer comfort, doesn't pat your shoulder and say, it's fine, it'll get better. It just shoves those numbers coldly in front of you, and you have to process them yourself. We can jump straight to 2026 data that gives everyone a more immediate feel. January through May 2026, total retail sales, social retail, grew only 1.4% year-on-year. On first glance, that sounds okay, right? Still growing, positive. But look at May alone. Down 0.6% year-on-year, negative. This is the first time in 3.5 years since December 2022 that monthly retail sales turned negative year-on-year. 3.5 years. We got through the harshest COVID lockdowns, got through 2022's wave of property developers imploding one after another, got through the full-blown tariff war in 2025, and then in May 2026, Chinese consumer spending was still lower than the previous year. Can you believe that? What does retail sales mean? Walk into any store, open any shopping app, sit down at any restaurant, add up everyone's spending, that total just went negative. It means the Chinese people as a whole spent less on consumption than the same period last year. This isn't slowing growth, it's absolute volume shrinking. The last time this happened, we were still in lockdown. Let me break it down further. To the category level, it gets even clearer. May auto retail sales fell 16.1% year-on-year. Do you understand what that means? For every 10 cars sold, the revenue was down by more than 1.5 compared to the same period last year. Auto sales? That's a big ticket item. For an ordinary family, the largest purchase after a house. Cars aren't selling because people's expectations for the future have deteriorated to a genuinely serious degree. Think about it, someone buying a car in the 100,000 yuan range. It's not that they don't have a need. Their old car might be 7 or 8 years old, about time for an upgrade. But they won't make the move. Why? Because they're not sure if their job will still be there next year. Not sure if income will drop. Not sure if their small business can hold on. So they just keep waiting. Let's see how it goes. And once this let's wait and see mentality becomes a social mood, the consumer market is done. It's not just cars. Home appliances and audio equipment fell 15.6%, furniture fell 8.7%, building materials fell 13.6%. Put these categories together, and you've got the full post-real estate consumption chain. You buy a house, then you need to renovate. Renovate, then you buy furniture. Furniture set up, then you add appliances. Every link in this chain is declining, which means fewer people are buying houses, fewer home buyers, and all the downstream demand dries up. It's not that one industry is struggling, the entire consumption chain from top to bottom is falling apart. And these categories had government subsidy policies, trade-in programs last year boosting the base. High base plus policy effects wearing off made this year's numbers look especially ugly. Last May, home appliance retail grew over 30% year-on-year. This year, straight to negative 15.6%. From positive 30 to negative 15 in 1 year, growth rate swung nearly 50 percentage points. For businesses above designated size, large and medium enterprises, with annual main business revenue of 5 to 20 plus million yuan, total retail fell 5.2% in May year-on-year. Note, this is above designated size the hardest, most robust part of the statistical umbrella. It fell 5.2%. Compare that to overall retail's negative 0.6%, and you see, Big businesses, big platforms, fell much harder than the average. Because subsidy withdrawal hit precisely the big players. Small restaurants, corner shops, mom-and-pop stores actually held some resilience. In other words, the regular army is already rooting. Then you get to June, thinking it'll improve. It didn't. Data from the China Passenger Car Association shows June nationwide retail sales of 1.651 million passenger vehicles, down 21% year-on-year. 21%, not 2.1%, 21%. First half cumulative retail sales, 875,000 vehicles, down 20% year-on-year. Picture this, a 20 million vehicle per year auto market. First half sales chopped by a fifth compared to last year. 4 million vehicles gone. 4 million vehicles. Behind each one is a major household spending decision, a purchase of 100, 2,000 to several 100,000 yuan. 4 million families chose not to spend that money. This isn't a minor fluctuation, it's structural demand collapse. But this isn't even the scariest part. Consumption is collapsing, and so is investment. January through May 2026, national fixed asset investment fell 4.1% year-on-year, with real estate development investment down 16.2%. Note the wording fixed asset investment fell, not growth rate slowed. Actual nominal value is shrinking. The whole society is spending less on investment than the same period last year. What does this signal mean? Businesses don't dare invest. They don't believe they'll get their money back. Local governments don't dare build because fiscal revenue is gone. Debt pressure is crushing. Ordinary people don't dare buy property because prices are still falling. Income expectations are deteriorating. Everyone is pulling back. Everyone is stepping away. Within fixed asset investment, excluding real estate, the decline is 1.2%, meaning even stripping out the worst performing sector, what's left is still negative. Infrastructure investment is barely holding on thanks to ultra-long-term special bonds, but manufacturing investment has already turned negative. Equipment and tool purchases still show 9.3% growth, but that's policy-driven, not market-driven. And I want to teasing you. These numbers aren't from back-channel sources, aren't things I made up. These are numbers that were read on the evening news, posted in black and white on the National Bureau of Statistics website. The data is this bad. So I have to ask, what exactly is the decision-making level so worried about? You might say, print money, the central bank, quantitative easing, what's so hard about that? Yes, you're right. Technically, the PBOC expanding its balance sheet isn't difficult. Deploying a few $100 billion in liquidity is just a matter of one operational window. Look, at July 6th, the PBOC finally launched a 1 trillion yuan outright reverse repo operation, net injecting 200 billion. The market erupted with cheers, saying monetary policy had shifted, saying an easing cycle had begun. But go back and check. Starting from March, the PBOC had been conducting shrinking seesaw, incremental rollover, for 4 consecutive months. Outright reverse repos got smaller and smaller. Funds kept being withdrawn. A Dongfang Jincheng analyst put it clearly. July's increase ended 4 months of continuous shrinking, which means from spring to early summer, a full 4 months, the PBOC was tightening. The economy was tanking, retail sales were negative, investment was falling, and the central bank was still tightening. Tightened for 4 months. Then in July, when things clearly weren't right, when market rates had climbed, when overnight and 7-day interbank rates were beads-in policy rates, when CD rates also climbed, only then did they rush to increase rollovers, rush to compensate. What do you call that? That's someone falling in a river, and you watching from the bank for 4 months, waiting until they're almost underwater to toss them a life preserver. What makes it even more woo-you is the PBOC's Monetary Policy Committee meeting on July 8th. Wording said, "Continue implementing moderately loose monetary policy. Strengthen counter-cyclical and cross-cyclical adjustment. Moderately loose." Do you understand what the situation is right now? Retail sales turned negative. Investment is declining. Mortgage balances shrank for the first time in annual terms. Household leverage is passively falling. PPI has been negative for years. CPI is barely above 1%. This is deflation. This is demand collapse. In the face of this situation, are the words moderately loose enough? When the US launched quantitative easing in 2008, They called it whatever it takes. But that's not even what I want to get at. The PBOC's liquidity injection solves one layer of the problem. There's no shortage of money in the banking system, but the money isn't reaching ordinary people. What really needs to happen? Fiscal side needs to fire. The government directly transfers payments to residents, give everyone 10,000 yuan. That's 1.4 trillion for 1.4 billion people. Once that money reaches households, even if half goes straight to mortgage repayment, the remaining hundreds of billions is real consumer spending. Groceries need buying, right? Some clothes need purchasing, right? Kids' summer classes need signing up for, right? More importantly, the portion paying down mortgages isn't wasted. Either household monthly payment pressure eases, next month's disposable income increases. Marginal propensity to consume naturally rises. 1.4 trillion yuan thrown in, and the stagnant consumption pool will definitely splash. But the PBOC can't do this. Direct payments to residents are fiscal actions, requiring State Council approval and Ministry of Finance execution, not something one PBOC department can decide. What the PBOC can do is pump liquidity into the banking system. But where that water flows after entering the banking system, the PBOC doesn't control. For the past 2 years, M2 growth hasn't been low. Plenty of money has been printed. The PBOC kept empowering the banking system, but banks receiving liquidity didn't transmit it to the real economy and households. Where's the money? The money is conedran inside the financial system, spinning around interbank markets, spinning in the bond market, rolling between CDs. Hundreds of trillions of yuan in capital, borrowing from each other, arbitraging each other, manufacturing a facade of prosperity inside the financial system, just refusing to head toward consumption. In essence, the financial system ran an internal empowerment initiative, with resources all spinning internally, la tong to the front line, meaning people like you and me. Ordinary households. The money is having a party inside the financial system, it just won't come out. This is why the issue isn't whether the PBOC prints money, but whether money can actually reach your hands. So what about the fiscal side? Why isn't the fiscal side firing either? You really need to think about this. Money has feet. Once you release it, you can't control where it flows. You give 10,000 yuan to ordinary people, maybe half or more goes straight to mortgage repayment, flowing to banks. Banks get early repayments, their balance sheets look better, but the real economy's incremental demand isn't created proportionally. Only a few hundred billion might actually become consumption stimulus. Effect is discounted, but still better than giving nothing at all. But here's the problem. Once you massively print and distribute money, expectations for the entire monetary system go haywire. What will people think? They'll think the government has started printing money and giving it out, so they'll keep doing it. Money will keep becoming worth less. So inflation expectations rise, the RMB exchange rate comes under pressure, capital outflows accelerate. This chain reaction is the real concern. So they'd rather endure deflation than risk loss of control. Deflation isn't an accident, it's a trade-off. Sit with those 8 words. To put it bluntly, between loss of control and deflation, the decision-makers chose what they assessed as the smaller cost, and the pain of deflation is slowly digested by ordinary people. This isn't negligence, it's a choice. For you, it's suffering. For the people making the choices, it's an acceptable cost. If you think the problem is just that money isn't reaching ordinary people, that's naive. Money hasn't just not arrived, it's leaving. Let me run the numbers for you. Full year 2025, China's goods trade surplus was close to 1.2 trillion USD, among the highest of any major economy in recent years. That's customs data. Add up the 6 years from 2020 to 2025, and the cumulative trade surplus is about 4.9 trillion USD, nearly 35 trillion RMB. But China's State Administration of Foreign Exchange Balance of Payments tells you, in those 6 years, only about 60% of the surplus was converted back into domestic currency. The remaining nearly 2 trillion USD stayed overseas. What does that mean? You did 6 years of hard business, exchanged countless workers' sweat and overtime for foreign exchange income, and 40% of it never returned to China's financial system. This money, in the form of USD deposits, overseas bonds, offshore stocks, is parked in offshore markets. Simply put, capital collectively run ed emigrated. Made money, didn't spend it domestically, didn't invest it domestically, went overseas to allocate assets. In investment parlance, voting with their feet. Meanwhile, on the capital account, it's a whole different story. In 2025 alone, China's non-reserve financial account deficit was a staggering $7.8 billion USD. With portfolio investment net outflows of $426 billion USD, more than doubling from the previous year's $179 billion USD. Households and enterprises are frantically moving money overseas. Add up these years' figures, cumulative net capital outflow is about $1.8 trillion USD. Money abroad can't come back, and money inside keeps running out. How can the domestic economy have any vitality? You have domestic demand withering on one side and massive capital outflows on the other. A bathtub with the inlet pipe getting thinner and thinner, the drain getting wider and wider, water level can only drop, and the negative retail sales, negative investment growth you're seeing right now. Those are the mud banks showing below the waterline. But why isn't water coming in? What's the root issue? As I was organizing this data, the more I looked, the more something felt off. Then it finally clicked. The deeper issue is distribution. This distribution problem is the root of all problems. China's labor compensation as a share of GDP has long fluctuated between 51% and 53%. You create 100 yuan of GDP. Only about 53 yuan flows back to workers in the form of wages, bonuses, social insurance, and the like. Where does the other 47 yuan go? To corporate profits, government tax revenue, fixed asset depreciation. What are developed country levels? US labor compensation share of GDP is above 56%. Nordic countries higher still, generally 60% to 65% or above. And that's using GDP accounting. If you look at household disposable income as a share of GDP, the gap is even wider. 2025. China's per capita disposable income as a share of GDP was only 43.5% less than half. The US, personal disposable income as a share of GDP is between 73% and 75%. In other words, after China produces that GDP pie, the slice that actually ends up as freely disposable income for ordinary people is less than half. You create value, but most of that value doesn't come back to you. You earn 10,000 yuan in wages a month, but the GDP contribution behind that might be 20,000 yuan. That extra 10,000 isn't yours. It's corporate profit, government tax, various things you can't see. Now look at 2025 export rebate data. Full-year export tax refunds exceeded 2.1 trillion yuan, 12% of total tax revenue. What is this 2.1 trillion yuan? Essentially, the government foregoing tax revenue to subsidize exporters, letting them compete internationally at lower prices. This money could have gone to social security, healthcare, education, consumer stimulus. Instead, it went to subsidizing exports. Subsidizing whom? Subsidizing overseas consumers. You're using Chinese tax revenue to subsidize overseas consumers. So I've always said, the essence of China's economic problem isn't production efficiency, it's distribution. Your production efficiency is already extremely high. World's largest manufacturing nation, largest exporter. Trade surplus set an all-time record for any single Chinese economy in recorded history. But your distribution structure determines that most of the wealth from this production efficiency never flows to ordinary people's pockets. Where does it flow? To corporate profits, to government fiscal revenue, to the steel and cement of infrastructure construction, to the bill of export tax rebates, to the allocation of overseas assets, just not to ordinary people's wallets. So retail sales numbers look so terrible. It's not that Chinese people suddenly stopped wanting to spend, it's that Chinese people genuinely don't have that much money to spend. 2025 national per capita disposable income, 43,377 yuan, or 3,614 yuan per month. Median even lower, 36,231 yuan, or 3,019 yuan per month. Meaning half the country's population has monthly disposable income under 3,000 yuan. 3,000 yuan. How do you live on that in a first-tier city? Rent eats it all. Even in a county town, covering a family's food and basic expenses doesn't leave much. Goldman Sachs published a report on the 17th of June 2026. When I read it, I went back over it several times. The numbers spoke volumes. China's household debt to GDP ratio is about 59%. At first glance, US is 70%, Japan is 62%. China looks pretty healthy, right? Lower than you'd think? But switch the denominator, not GDP, but disposable income, and the problem explodes. China's household debt to disposable income ratio is a staggering 140%, while the US is only 81%. Why does the same debt figure tell a completely different story when you change the denominator? Because China's household disposable income is only 45% of GDP. The US is 75%. The same 59 trillion yuan in debt in an economy where disposable income is less than half of GDP versus an economy where it's 3/4, the pressure is completely different magnitudes. You and an American both carry a million yuan mortgage. His after-tax annual income might be much higher than yours. That million is just a number to him. To you, it's a lifetime shackle. Goldman Sachs put it diplomatically in the original report. Although debt relative to total output appears manageable, it is far more burdensome relative to income actually retained by households. Translating into plain English, Chinese families aren't borrowing too much, they're earning too little. The same debt yars a Chinese families far harder than American families. As of end 2025, household loan balance in RMB and foreign currency was 83.28 trillion yuan. Personal mortgage balance was 37.01 trillion yuan. That mortgage number in full year 2025, it decreased by a net 676.8 billion yuan, first annual decline in recorded history. Previously, we talked about households leveraging up, everyone scrambling to borrow and buy property, rushing to get on the ladder. Now, everyone's scrambling to pay down debt. Not because lower mortgage rates make it economical, many paid down in March when rates were still above 4%. Why? Because income expectations are shot, cash flow can't sustain it. They must deleverage. Q1 2026 worsens further. Household loan growth turned negative 0.4%, same as household sector debt growth, first negative growth in recorded history since 1995. Household leverage ratio fell from its 2022 peak of 63.5% to 59% in Q1 2026, 4 percentage points in 4 years. Sounds almost okay. But understand this. This decline didn't happen because people's incomes rose and drove down the leverage ratio. It's because people can't borrow anymore. No new debt, old debt still being paid, income not rising or even falling, your leverage ratio naturally declines. This isn't proactive deleveraging. This is passive lying flat. Not because people got smarter, because people's wallets got thinner. Go look at end 2025 data. National household deposit balance, 167 trillion yuan. Per capita deposit, about 118,000 yuan. That number sounds decent, right? But look at the median. Median household deposit, about 87,000 yuan. I reconfirmed this figure several times when I saw it. 87,000 yuan. A family's entire savings. 87,000 yuan. What can you do with that? Keep a family of 4 going in a first-tier city for 3 or 4 months. Keep them going in a county town for half a year. Keep them going in the countryside for a year. Do you think these families have purchasing power? They're not choosing not to spend. They genuinely don't have money to spend. The central bank survey shows 62.9% of residents prefer more savings, while only 23.3% prefer more consumption. It's not that they're born savers. They're scared. Mortgages are demanding payment. Kids are waiting. Elderly parents might get sick and need care. Jobs could disappear any day. You think you can not save? Strip any country's economic indicators down to their core and they always boil down to 2 words: distribution.